This video is about flushing the transmission fluid or changing the transmission fluid. So we have new fluid. Valvoline makes a max life that is compatible with a lot of vehicles, but you should always read on the back what vehicles this will replace. Okay, so it's a Toyota, and it will it's listed right here with their type of fluid. So it will work for my 2001 Toyota Tacoma. Let's go ahead and start the vehicle and see what our level's like. Now this is just, I want to just check the condition, the level, but I will say this is not the best surface to check your fluid because it is a little bit slanted to the rear, which would make your fluid level be a little low. Mine's a little hard to find all the way down inside here. It's real hard to get your hand on there. And you got to push this little tang down and then pull it out. Okay? So the first one is just to check the condition. And let's see. Yeah, I'm just doing this as regular maintenance, so it's good. No soot. It is a little bit discolored. I'm 160,000 miles on it, and it's been at least 80,000 miles since I did my last service. So now let's just check the fluid level. I'm gonna put that back in. So the first dip is to check your condition. Your second dip is always to check your level. Let's bring this into the sun. Let's see. So yeah, so this is in the middle here where it's cold, and when it gets hot, it goes between these two dots. So the first two dots is for cold. The second and the third dot is for hot. So I'm actually at a good level right here. I'm pretty happy. So let's begin with how we're going to do this transmission service. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to drain the transmission pan because my transmission, the Tacoma, has a drain bolt. If the transmission does not have a drain bolt, you have no choice but to unbolt the pan and let it leak out. So we're lucky that in this video that my transmission does have a drain bolt. So I'm going to remove that bolt. Then I'm going to remove and change the pan gasket and the filter. Okay. I'm going to inspect my magnet, which is that little round donut right here, to see if there's any material on there. The least amount of material, the better. If the transmission is wearing out, you're going to find little pieces of metal flakes on there. That's not a good sign. So let me go ahead and show you another example. So when you remove that pan, you really want to inspect these magnets real closely for any type of abnormal wear. Okay, and you want to feel it with your hand, feeling for any grittiness or soot, because that's going to be your main catch-all for anything that's indicating that the transmission is starting to fail. Okay, so then we change our filter and we change our gasket. We put that back on. And then when we get that back on, after cleaning everything, we're going to go ahead and fill the transmission back up. This particular animation shows you what you would do with a fill plug and not a dipstick. So if you have a fill plug, you fill it up to a specified amount of fluid, depending on what the manufacturer states. So you could do that with a machine that we will be using in the video. But the transmission that we do have with my Tacoma has a dipstick, so we're pretty lucky about that. Once you fill the fluid up, you want to go ahead and start the car, and you want to circulate that fluid that's sitting in the pan through what we call a valve body, and then through the pump, through the different clutches, and through our torque converter. So it's really important when you change your fluid to cycle it between reverse, neutral, drive, to, and low, or whatever combination you have to get all the fluid moving through these different passages in our valve body. Okay. One last thing to note is the pan holds like 4 quarts, but there's an additional 1 or 2 quarts inside your transmission. And there's also an additional 4 quarts of fluid or more in your torque converter. So it's really important that we do not only the pan and those 4 quarts in the fluid, but we also do what we call a transmission flush. So a fluid flush is done with a machine. You loosen the transmission cooler lines. You hook up this machine to the cooler lines, And you have new fluid and old fluid. And what you're going to do is you're going to suck out like a couple quarts of fluid and fill it up the exact amount of quarts that you sucked out. And so the old and new fluid should match and amount by the time you're done. And we're going to demonstrate that in our video today. Okay, it's a pretty painless process. It's pretty easy. This is showing you that on the fill plug, you fill it up until it leaks out, and then you hook up those cooler lines again, and away you go. The nice thing about that flush machine, it sets the fluid level to the correct amount. Okay, so we're underneath the vehicle now. We checked our fluid. We've gone over how the whole system works on the virtual image. So now, when I went and bought the transmission filter for my Tacoma, there were two different types, and they wanted to know my bolt pattern. So just like differentials, you gotta count. They wanted me to count my bolts: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 14. So looks like it's going to be this one right here. Okay. So there are two different filter options to choose from, and it was like an A340E versus an A340B. The transmission itself is an A340, but there's different applications within that. So we are not going to use this one. I'm going to return that to the parts store. I'm going to be using this one, and you can also see the filter's different too. Okay, so we're going to box this back up, and we're going to replace this.
Rolling.
So we reuse our fluid in our shop because I just can't afford 180 kids doing transmission service and throw that fluid away when the cars never leave. So we gotta always make sure we clean it in the solvent tank. We will be using this fluid catch, but start off with a clean bucket. Get all that, anything that you think is a contaminant, old oil, dirt. You got to get that out. It's not good for your transmission that you'll be doing on the shop cars. Get that drained really well. And then we're going to be using a fluid catch, which makes it a lot easier to catch the fluid onto our from our car. The other thing I want to mention is this has a dipstick, so come over here. This has a dipstick coming down into our transmission pan. It has a slip joint right here. So to make it easier, I have the dipstick out so it's not in my pan. So when I unbolt this, this is going to be a slip joint. This is going to make it a little bit challenging. So I'm going to actually drain the fluid from the drain bolt here. And then to change the filter, I'm going to loosen all the bolts till I get to like 1 or 2 back here, and then we're going to let it peel down and then pull out. Okay, so let's get started. So make sure we got the wrench, because look at that, my ratchet's going the wrong way. Always make sure you're going the right way with this. So just like an engine, it's kind of nice. They give us a little drain bolt to drain this transmission. Transmission services, a lot of transmissions do not give you this bolt, and it creates a really challenge to do this cleanly, because the fluid will splash, it'll get all over the place. You'll see it when I drop my pan. Okay, and again, I want to check my condition. I'm due for a change. It's not bad fluid, but it definitely has 80,000 miles on it. When you have a old fluid on a car like this, it creates a shudder at freeway speed. So a thing about old fluid, when fluid gets old, it loses properties, different properties. One of them is friction modifiers. It tends to burn up and it becomes kind of sooty. And what that causes is on a slight incline, when you're going up a slight incline at 30 to 50 miles an hour and you slowly accelerate, you'll feel a shudder, like it feels like you're going over a washboard. or the little markers on the side of the freeway, and you can feel it through the whole car. And what it is the torque converter clutch is slipping, and that causes a shuttering condition between 30 and 50 miles an hour. And the only reason why we have a torque converter clutch is because of fuel economy. So as you're accelerating, it's trying to disengage that clutch, and that's what's creating the shutter. And the correction would be to replace the fluid first, and then if the fluid doesn't fix it, then you want to change your torque converter. And your torque converter would be right here inside your bell housing. So this is your bell housing right here, and inside your torque converter. And you got to pull the whole transmission out to change that. So first try the fluid, and that doesn't work, change your torque converter. We're going to go over all this with a torque wrench at the end. I'm just going to use 2 fingers tight, and that's that. So now we can go ahead and start taking our bolts. I let my bolts just drop in the pan. So just drop them in the pan. On this side. And last 2 bolts, I'm just going to loosen. And you can see the pan, and look right here. You see the pan just dropped. So now I got, if there wasn't a plug here, this would be leaking fluid right now, but it'd be leaking away from you so you don't get splashed. So now it's a balancing job. Okay, so I already got all my fluid out. So now I could go ahead and take these last 2 bolts out. So if you didn't have this drain bolt, you would do it this way and let the fluid drain out the back side of this pan. And there's still fluid in there, I'm sure, so you'll see it. Okay? And now I gotta try to get it loose on this this slip joint right here without it yanking, because if it yanks out, boy, all the fluid that's in there is gonna go flying. There it is, it's starting to go. So it's a little stiff. There we go. And this is the fluid I was talking about. Okay, so now let's drain it out, and now let's go look in the sun and see the condition. All right, so what I'm looking for is excessive amount of soot. So every transmission is going to have a magnet. There will be soot on the magnet, okay? And I should get a cleaner finger. Let's see. So every transmission will have a soot. That's a normal amount. That's the friction material from the torque converter clutch, the fluid. So it will have, but what you don't want to see is metallic flakes. And you can see that's caused from me taking my finger and doing this, all that soot in the fluid. But I don't see any metallic flakes. Maybe one right there, but yeah, so my transmission is shifting fine and not acting up. So we're just going to do a fluid and filter change. So now it's time to clean my transmission pan. Don't want to lose that magnet. We could take those magnets out, but you got to put these magnets back in. Okay, they're a must. They just keep contaminants from going through your transmission, and it holds the contaminants inside your pan. So I'm going to clean those magnets first. If you want to wear gloves using a solvent tank, fine. It's up to you and your sensitivity to chemicals. It's really just detergent. And we want to do the back side, make sure there's no dirt. Like you saw the dirt on my hand, that was from holding this pan. Let that dry, and now let's go do our filter. Okay, so we're gonna be focusing on a flush Now I will say the kit comes with a new filter, but I decided not to change my filter because I don't have any problems with my transmission. There was no soot, and I have two tubes that come, especially this one comes right over the filter, and I don't want to take those tubes out. They just pop out with a screwdriver and they press in with a little tap. But you know, if you got the filters clean and you didn't see any soot, then I'm going to go ahead and clean the whole thing off with brake fluid. But before I do that, when you do a flush, you need to understand this only changes about 3 to 4 quarts. But then in the torque converter up front is another 3 to 4 quarts. And then in the transmission is at least another quart. So you got a quart here, another 4 here, and let's say another 4 here. 9 quarts of fluid that you got to flush. So the way I like to do it is 2 ways. If you don't have this transmission flusher, then your option is to put the pan back up, put a bolt on each side, fill it up with fluid, and then run it through the gears on the lift, and then turn it off, raise it up, and then re-drop this pan, change that fluid, put this back up with another bolt, lower it down, fill it up with fluid, cycle it through the gears, raise the car back up, unbolt the 4 bolts again, drain that fluid, and then the last one you do, you change the gasket, and that's your permanent one. Now the one thing I will say that's nice about this is I have a drain bolt. So a drain bolt allows you to not have to drop the pan. So I could go ahead and change this gasket right now, bolt it up, and then to flush the transmission, I'm going to fill it with fluid, pull this, cycle it through the gears, raise it up in the air, pull this bolt out, let it drain, put it back in, and then lower it down, fill it with more fluid, cycle it through the gears, raise it back up, drain it again, and then you'd be ready to put the final quarts in. So at least 3 times you want to drop this pan if you don't have this machine. We have this machine and we're going to use it to put this into the dipstick and flush our fluid that way. So let's go ahead and clean this gasket off. So now we got to get this gasket off. Transmission gaskets that are old, they tend to get real brittle and they tend to break, and they also get stuck on these things pretty severely. So this one's actually, once I got started, seems like it's coming off pretty easy. Okay, but once when I get all the way around, then I'm going to take a razor blade, get it somewhat close. Let's see. With a razor blade, okay, but I'm happy where I'm at. Now I'm going to use a die grinder with just a gasket remover bit, or you could use the Scotch-Brite type. This is the one I like the best. So let's get some air. There we go. That little bit's not coming off, so I'm going to just use my razor blade real quick, get that little bit off. Okay, so it's always good to have a little razor blade if you got some little tough areas that won't come off quite with the Scotch-Brite or the die grinder tool. But man, it saves so much work having that ability. A little bit right here. So it's all about the attention to detail. You know, you don't want to have any little piece of gasket remaining that could potentially cause an uneven surface and cause a leak. So the question came up, why not the rag? And the reason why you don't want to use the rag, it has lint in it. Okay, like I'm pulling it from the lint, and you can see the lint gets up here and it becomes a problem. The only thing I would be okay with is wiping the flange down right here where the pan goes. And what I'm lucky about is I don't have to scrape the aluminum surface on here. It's already kind of clean. But I don't want to use anything but brake clean. And you won't be able to pick it up in the camera, but I could see little pieces of lint around. So now I'm going to go over it with brake clean. Always brake clean. If you get trained by a dealership, they would tell you they'll use lint-free rags, which no one has. Maybe a transmission shop might have lint-free rags, but just clean this off for brake clean. Let it drip dry, and the reason why you want to use brake clean is, like I say, it evaporates it almost immediately. And we're good. So now I have my bolts in my hand. I'm just going to clean those bolts off. Okay. And we're going to get our gasket. I always put gaskets for transmissions on dry if I can. I don't use any kind of sealant or holding sealant. And what's nice is this particular pan gasket, I could put a bolt in and it will hold that gasket in place for me, so I don't need to worry about lining. So I'm gonna put 4 bolts in here, and then that will help, because remember, I gotta line up this tube to the pan, or to the filler tube. So let's get maybe this one better. Okay, let's go up. I'm gonna stab this right into the tube right here, but kind of clean it off first. Okay, and hang on just a second. Yes, I noticed something fell when I just wiped it off. So this seal is supposed to sit in this groove, but when I pulled the transmission off, it pulled the seal off too. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a little bit of oil and lubricate this and stick this back up. If that seal wasn't on there and I stabbed it, I just created a leak. So now this fluid, this pan should go right back up. There we go, just had to give it a little tap. Line up into my holes. Always start all transmission bolts by hand, okay? Too many people try this for the first time and they cross thread these bolts. That's why when I teach a transmission class at the college, I always learn how to do a time insert for cross threaded bolts. So always start these by hand. So I had to push this pan over and then use an extension to give me a little bit more leverage to start these front two, because the tube itself was pushing the pan this way. That's what causes these bolts to be stripped, is people don't take they don't pay attention to the forces that are misaligning your holes. They just run the bolt down and it's ruined. So if you have to pry on the bolt pan to get it where you can start these by hand, great, but don't force them, okay? All right, last bolt, got it started. Start all your bolts by hand loose, and then you can go ahead and run them down till they hit with a little electric gun like this. So just run them down in a star pattern, but I'm not gonna torque it. Notice I'm just barely running these down. There we go. Time for a torque wrench. So we have our inch-pound torque wrench. The spec was 65 inch-pounds, so we're going to torque it to that. A thing on extensions, the longer the extension, the less accurate it is. There's actually a formula to figure out how much torque you're losing. But we're going to just go with a 2-inch extension, just long enough to get past this pan, and I'm going to torque this to 65 inch-pounds, which is the strength of like one finger, Okay, so let's do this first one so you can see. And my worry with torque wrenches, inch-pound torque wrenches, is people use too many fingers on it, and they don't feel when that bolt actually torque, or when the torque wrench clicks. There we go. Okay, so if you use like too many fingers, you'll just keep turning and you won't feel that click. As I was turning it, I was doing it with one finger. So now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna just keep one finger on there. There we go. And like I say, it's so easy to go past torque specs. So always keep that in mind with inch-pound torque wrenches. If you use too many fingers, you'll never feel it. And come over to the side here. I want you to see how that puts a proper press on the gasket here. So if you over torque it, then that gasket could potentially crack or actually shoot. There we go. So it puts the right amount of torque to compress that gasket. Again, you can look right here. These bolts I have not torqued. That's why you don't see this little ridge. So we're gonna go around and finish this now in a star pattern. So I'm on my last bolt right here, and I'm gonna go till it clicks. And you see that gasket getting crushed properly, and you can see it all the way down. And I gotta say, if you over torque these, you'll split the gasket and the gasket will potentially protrude out. So all of them been torqued by hand with a torque wrench at 65 inch-pounds, which is the strength, I would argue, of just your pinky finger. So attention to detail. I'm not going to wipe the inside of my funnel off with a rag, because that would be like wiping the pan off with a rag. So again, brake clean. Just spray it, shake it, get all the excess out. Stick that down. That's why these longer funnels are nice. You can get it down in that tight area right here. And I'm only going to put in 3 quarts. I don't want to overfill it. Okay. Between the 2 and the 3, and then we're going to start it and see what we got. Going down to 3. There we go. We're a little bit more than I wanted to, but that's good. Let that drain, and then we're going to start it up and check our fluid. So I want to start it up, and then I'm going to put it into each gear range. So I'm going to put it in reverse, neutral, drive, 2 and 1, and then go back up and then turn the car. So here's park. Now I'm going to go to reverse, neutral, drive, 2 and 1. And then I'm going to go back up. And then let's go check our fluid. So I'm going to be real quick with that. I want to catch any fluid that would potentially drip. And grab another rag. I'm not worried about going through a lot of rags. And because that dipstick tube is long, I'm going to actually push this several times like this and not test any of it until I know that that fluid is down all the way. So I'm just going to move that dipstick tube up and down, because you're going to have residue that stays in that tube. I'm all the way down now, and I'm going to pull it out. And I'm not even going to look at it. I'm just going to wipe it off. And now let's go ahead and see if we get an accurate reading. The problem with long tubes, it does mess up your readings, and it might take a while for that residue to get all the way down to the pan. So, and this one, you got to make sure it clips in. So let's go into the light and let's see what we got. Oh, it's not. It's just barely hitting the tip. I could put in another Probably another half a quart. Now we are going to use the transmission flusher, but the main thing about the transmission flusher is you got to start off with your fluid level correct. So that's why this is important. Oh, wrong one. The danger of overfilling your fluid is if you actually were just doing this on your own and you left the transmission fluid overfilled, it cavitates and it creates air bubbles in the fluid. And just like brakes, a transmission is hydraulic. You can't have air in the fluid, so you can't have the cavitation, which is the stirring the fluid so fast that it actually creates air bubbles. That will burn your transmission up. So it's better, if anything, to be low than to be overfilled. So don't trust the first dip. You're going to trust the second one, and it might even take longer than that. See what we got. Yep, we're right on the cold mark right there. Perfect. Guessed that just right. Okay, so we're good. Now let's go ahead and do our flush. So we're about ready to use this fluid flusher. I'm going to go ahead and fill the flusher up with new fluid. So this is where you fill it up at. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that fluid using the funnel. And then you put in whatever amount of fluid that you want to flush in here. So I already changed 4 quarts. So I want to do another like 5 to 6 quarts. So that way you end up flushing out 10 quarts. So I'm going to actually dump in the other jug of this into the machine, and then we're going to flush it out for 6 quarts because we already changed 4. So this is a Flow Dynamics transmission flusher. It's model TSD735. It's part of Snap-on. We have a transmission instruction manual that will walk you through it with actually fluid-proof sheets. What we are going to do is we're going to do a dipstick exchange. So we're going to go through this, but we're not going to be doing a cleaning operation. So when it tells us if you want to do cleaning, this step right here, you hit 1 for no cleaning. Okay, but we're really going to go through this whole process. And you look right now, this is the adapter we need. We need a gray hose, a red hose with the adapter, and a dipstick tube, which is this right here. We have it all set up because most of our cars in the shop are dipstick transmissions. We have these other adapters right here. These adapters are if you don't have a dipstick and you hook it up to the transmission cooler line. So all transmissions have a cooler line going to the radiator or auxiliary cooler. And if you don't have a dipstick, you can still do a flush by disconnecting the fluid cooler lines and hooking the machine up to that. We do have a dipstick on this Toyota Tacoma, so we're going to go ahead and start with that. So I have my dipstick already out because this is a measuring tool. We need the dipstick tube right here to go down the same distance. They give you this little fitting right here, so when you're done with the flush, you put this back in, and then that allows the fluid to go into the used recycled fluid. So to remove this, we're going to go ahead and push down. It's just a decoupler. We're going to push down on that green button and pull that out. And then we're going to actually, right at the top right here, we're going to actually measure the actual distance that we're going to shove this down inside our dipstick tube. So that's how far I want my finger right here to be right on top of the tube. I'm going to stick that down inside there like that. Unhook the assembly, and I'm going to shove that tube down all the way until my finger touches it. And there we go. And you can feel it bottom out, but you always want to measure it. And then the next step is you're gonna have to have this away from the belts. So I have this nice area right here that's not in the way. I could kind of hook it around the cleat right here for pulling your motor. So the tubes are completely free of my belt because we have to start our car during the process. So let's begin. So the first thing we got to do is we got to hook the machine up to our battery. It works off of a car battery. It does not work off of your like an extension cord that you plug into the wall. Okay, hooks right up to the battery, and that powers up the machine. Okay, and so the first step is we want to go ahead and we want to do a dipstick exchange. Now, if we were using those adapters over there, we would do the inline exchange. But since we're doing the dipstick exchange, we're going to hit 2. Now we set our quarts. So we're going to go ahead and we already changed 4 quarts with the pan. So we're going to actually do 5 quarts with the machine. Actually, we already done 3 as a practice run. So I'm going to bring it down to another 3 quarts. Okay. So we already done 3. We're going to do another 3. And we did the 4 quarts in the pan. So now I hit start. And we want to do a normal exchange. We want to use no cleaning. So I'm going to hit 1 for no cleaning and press start to begin. So what it's going to do is it's going to suck fluid out, and you see that the fluid right here is a dirty color. Okay, so it's going to suck out the old fluid. And remember, we already ran the car and cycled it through the gears, so it's going to suck out the old fluid, and then it's going to pump in the equal amount that it pulled out. So that's why it has a counter here, and it's counting the amount of fluid it's sucking out right now into the machine. And then you can see the fluid moving right here, and then it's going to change direction, and it's going to pump new fluid in, and you'll see the color of the hose change. So last time we did this in the first run, it sucked out 1.6, and then it switched to refilling. So if we see if it does it again. So this is all done through the dipstick tube. Real simple procedure. There you go. And you see all the air bubbles? So it's already, the pan's probably completely empty right now, except for a little residue. And once when it realizes it's not drawing any more fluid in, it's going to reverse it and put in the exact amount. And we should hear the valves click when it does it. There it goes. Now watch the fluid. See how the color changed? The color changed to immediate, nice ruby red color. And it's putting in the exact same amount of fluid that it did before. So now it's going to tell me to start the engine. Okay, and when I'm going to do a little more than that, because some machines will tell you to start the engine and cycle it through each gear, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and start it, and then I'm going to cycle it through reverse, neutral, drive, 2, and 1, and low, and go from low, 2, drive, reverse, or neutral, reverse, park. And what that's doing is moving the fluid through all the different passages inside the transmission and flushing out different passages. So if you just left it in park, that's not as good of a flush as if you're going through each gear. Okay. So we started the engine, so now I'm going to hit start. And watch, the fluid now is going back in. Actually, I think it's taking it out. There it is, it's pulling it out right now. There we go. So we have 2 used. Did it a little bit differently last time, but you know, as long as we have 3 and 3, we're good. And the other important note is we started with the level correct. When the machine is done, we should be at the same level. So we're complete. We're 3 and 3, and that's all you need to worry about. Okay. So now let's go ahead and pull the dipstick out. You want to use a little rag so you don't drip over everywhere. Okay. And I'm going to stick that right inside this hole right here, so it doesn't go flying all over the place. Let's see. There we go. And then I'm going to take this adapter and I'm going to hang it right up here. And now, like I say, the level should be exactly the same as it was when we started this procedure. There we go. All the way down. And the other thing is you're filling the pan up beyond the dipstick tube, so you don't have to worry about the residue. And it's right there, right where we started. It's not up here. It's right below the second notch, which is the cold. We're good. And once when this transmission heats up, it'll be between these two dots. So that is a flush. So again, you want to drop the pan, clean the pan, change the filter if you can, and then put the pan back up. That is 3 to 4 quarts. Then you want to at least do another 6 quarts of flushing. If you have the machine, great, use the machine. If you don't have the machine, turn the car off, drop that little drain bolt, drain the pan again, put the bolt back in, fill it up, start it, run it through your gears, turn it off, lift the car back up, did the drain plug one more time, and then top it off when you're done. But with the machine, it does all that work for you. All right, so I did this flush on my own car, but you're going to be doing a flush on shop cars in a school environment. So we can't afford to be changing. In this case, it was probably equal to 80 bucks in fluid. I can't afford for 100 students to go through 80 bucks each in fluid. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the fluid back in. So let's go through the process. We just finished. And you can see right here, I have 3 quarts, and it says add new fluid, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and press 0 for menu, and it's not in this menu. We gotta hit the down arrow for more, and then you could see drain use tank, where we're gonna drain the tank back into the new tank for school purposes, okay? Now, what you do is you gotta get the red hose. So we get the red hose right here, we take it off our manifold, and we hook it up to a hose that will allow it to pour right out. And we're going to stick that right into the tank right here on the side. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit 7. And connect an open-ended drain hose to the red service hose. Okay. And you also need to have this valve pulled out. And then I'm going to hit start, and you can see it's pumping that fluid, and my fluid's clean because this was a vehicle that is my car, and I did regular maintenance on it. So we're just going to be using, it's a little old, but it's good enough for our shop cars. You're going to drain all the used oil back into the new oil, and we're going to reuse this fluid. And it just said use fluid complete, so you just missed it. Use fluid complete, and we're back to the main menu. Now let's go back to the main menu, and I'm going to hit down arrow. We could drain the new tank too. So let's say now we want to use this machine on a real person's car. We're using this machine for every shop car in our shop, or a certain amount. We don't want to be putting that fluid into a real person's car. So we could go ahead and drain the new tank as well. So if I was to drain the new tank, I would go and put this here. And now I hit 6, and I hit start, and now it's going to fill it up and put it back in the use tank. So because this is a school environment, you need to make sure that if it's a real person's car, we empty the new tank and put in new fluid, not reuse the fluid for the shop. How's that? I want to hit the down arrow. I want to hit 7. I want to hit start. And we're filling that the filler tank, the new tank up. And when that gets to 0, it will say complete. Okay, so now we just took the fluid that we pumped in the used tank and put it back in the new tank. When you're done with this, disconnect the adapter and then hook this back up to the manifold, and then disconnect your positive and negative battery cable and wrap that nice and neat on the side of the machine, and that's our flush. This is an image of a torque converter drain plug. You see that you have your pan right here with your pan gasket, which we'll go over in the video. But I talk about a bell housing of the transmission, and inside the bell housing is your torque converter. Some torque converters come with a drain plug. And what that means is you could go ahead and drain this torque converter by just removing this plug. And that allows you to not have to flush the transmission. So if you were able to drain the transmission pan and change the filter and drain the torque converter, the flush is almost not necessary because you're going to change most of the fluid. If you have this ability, then go ahead and remove that plug, and you got to turn the engine first. So you got to turn the engine until you can see the plug in the bell housing hole. So this is an important step in that you turn the engine until you see the plug at the bottom of the bell housing. And then once you see that plug, you remove that plug, and then you're able to drain the transmission torque converter. And usually when you drain this, it will end up being anywhere from 3 quarts all the way up to 6 quarts, 6.5 quarts that the torque converter can hold. A great way of changing the fluid. The last important detail is these plugs are going to be spinning at the speed of the engine. So it's imperative that you torque them to spec. This is actually an informational page from the manual, and it says you must torque it to 89 inch-pounds, which is not a lot of torque. So you need to use an inch-pound torque wrench, not a foot-pound torque wrench, and torque the boat to spec when you install it back in.